43. That is the number of paying spectators who reportedly showed up for a wheelchair basketball event at the 2025 Invictus Games in Vancouver. Prince Harry's signature charitable initiative, the one endeavor meant to demonstrate he could construct something meaningful beyond the walls of the monarchy. 43 people actually purchased tickets. And according to investigative biographer Tom Bower, organizers then rounded up approximately 100 additional individuals and positioned them around Harry and Meghan Markle specifically for photographs. Orchestrated, fabricated, an audience assembled for the lens, not the mission. Let that picture take hold in your mind. A venue engineered to seat thousands. A sport rooted in bravery and sacrifice, contested by wounded veterans who surrendered portions of their bodies in service to their nations. And 43 ticket holders materialized. Another 100 or so were ushered into formation, as though they were background performers on a production set. The basketball was genuine. The athletes were genuine. The agony those competitors endured to reach that court was genuine. Everything surrounding them was theater. Hold that image, because by the time this narrative concludes, you will comprehend precisely how the most recognized couple on Earth descended from a reported $100 million Netflix agreement, a $20 million Spotify arrangement, representation by the mightiest talent agency in the entertainment industry, and friendships with the Beckhams, Oprah Winfrey, and Elton John, to a wheelchair basketball match where they had to shuttle bodies in to occupy the frame. And you will comprehend it not as rumor, not as tabloid excess, but as a documented sequence. A chain of events stamped with dates, anchored by names, reinforced by internal grievances, and anchored further by one very particular Zoom call that a Spotify executive claims is among the most remarkable stories in his possession, one he has yet to share publicly. But before we arrive there, I need to tell you about The Shield, because there existed one man in Hollywood whose sole purpose was to ensure that damaging coverage about Meghan Markle never saw print. One man whose calls editors actually picked up. And the instant he stepped away, every story you have ever read about Meghan's professional collapse poured through the gap he left behind. That is not a figure of speech. That is a chronology. And the chronology begins with a book. In March of 2026, Tom Bower released his second investigation into the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The title alone signals the temperature: betrayal, power, deceit, and the battle for the future of the royal family. I recognize the reflex. Another royal book, another rotation of headlines, another 10 days of content before the world moves on. But Bower is not a palace gossip monger recycling blind items and unverified whispers. This is the journalist who uncovered Robert Maxwell's pension fraud before anyone else had the courage to publish it. He dismantled Gordon Brown's political mythology with sourced documentation, while Brown still occupied the office of Prime Minister. Bower's standard, and he has stated this openly, is that he retains exceptional lawyers, and more critically, he ensures that what he writes is the truth. His 2022 book on the Sussexes' revenge was assembled from 80 separate sources. 80 distinct individuals willing to speak on or off the record to a biographer whose reputation for rigor borders on clinical. So when the 2026 sequel arrives carrying claims so commercially precise and so personally devastating that the Sussex team felt compelled to issue an official public statement, the response they selected deserves very close examination. They labeled it deranged conspiracy. Consider that phrase for a moment. When someone publishes sourced, verifiable assertions, and your formal reply is to brand the entire work deranged conspiracy, that is not a denial. A genuine denial states that a particular date is wrong. A genuine denial states that a specific document does not exist. A genuine denial pinpoints a factual error and corrects it on the record. What they delivered instead was a characterization, a tone argument. They noted that Bower had never met them, which is true of nearly every investigative biographer who has ever produced credible work about a public figure. Bower never sat down with Robert Maxwell either. That did not render the pension fraud any less real. The arithmetic of that defense simply collapses. And here is the detail most people are overlooking. By responding publicly, by issuing a formal declaration, they revealed which claims in the book they regard as dangerous. Silence would have been the wiser course. Silence allows a news cycle to expire. A formal response is a signal flare. It announces this one connected, and it connected hard enough that Bower himself acknowledged the irony. Their public reaction propelled the book to #1 on Amazon. They became the promotional engine for the very investigation they sought to discredit. So what actually occupies these pages that merited that caliber of reaction? Allow me to walk you through it. Not the tabloid digest, but the actual documented claims in the sequence that matters. This is where the true architecture of the story begins. In April of 2023, Meghan Markle signed with William Morris Endeavor. If you operate outside the entertainment industry, that name may not resonate. But William Morris Endeavor is not merely a talent agency. It is the most powerful representation firm in Hollywood. The agency is led by Ari Emanuel, the man who personally represents Dwayne Johnson, Mark Wahlberg, and this connection is enormously significant. Oprah Winfrey. Signing with William Morris Endeavor is not equivalent to retaining a publicist. It is equivalent to deploying a private army. And multiple industry insiders have been explicit about what William Morris Endeavor's principal function for Meghan actually entailed. It was not about securing film roles or brokering brand partnerships. The primary function was press suppression, serving as a shield. When Ari Emanuel is in your corner, unfavorable stories about you confront a barrier they would not otherwise encounter. Publications reconsider. Editors place calls they would not ordinarily place. The cost of publishing a critical piece escalates because the subject of that piece is represented by someone who controls access to half the A-list talent in the industry. The shield was the entire purpose. Now, here is what unfolded next. And attend closely to the dates, because the dates are everything. Around Thanksgiving of 2023, Meghan reportedly erupted in what internal sources characterized as a fit over a perceived absence of attention from the agency during the holiday season. She then demanded a meeting in January of 2024. Sources indicate she arrived at that meeting anticipating what were described as decks and plans, formal, strategic presentations. The variety of deliverables you would expect from a consultancy, not a talent agency. And what followed, according to multiple independent insiders, was that Ari Emanuel was finished with her. A second source, someone with direct knowledge of the agency's operations, stated unambiguously that William Morris Endeavor was definitively no longer handling Meghan's personal business going forward. Here is the contradiction that should set off alarms. William Morris Endeavor publicly denied any shift in the relationship. The Sussex camp publicly denied any shift. Both parties sustained the illusion that the representation remained intact straight through early 2026. She was listed as represented. No public announcement of departure was ever issued. But behind that public facade, no active deals were being pursued on her behalf. No meetings had occurred since January of 2023. She was represented in name only, a client on paper with no agency supporting her in practice. And one Hollywood insider made the observation that ties every subsequent story together. This person stated on background that there is no way the Variety piece about her rupture with Netflix would have been published if William Morris Endeavor was still actively managing Meghan. Read that again. The shield collapsed in January of 2024, and every single negative story that has been published since, the Netflix tensions, the disintegration of her lifestyle brand, the cascade of staff departures, everyone appeared in the unprotected window that opened the instant that shield fell. That is not coincidence. That is cause and effect with a timestamp. And I want you to consider what that means for every public statement the Sussex camp issued during that period. Every denial, every assurance that matters were progressing, every meticulously worded spokesperson quote about exciting projects in development. All of it released during a window in which the person being discussed possessed no active representation, no deals in motion, and no agency operating on her behalf. The public narrative and the private reality had entirely detached, and neither side was willing to be the first to acknowledge it. That gap between what was being said and what was actually occurring is, in my analysis, the single most illuminating dynamic in this entire saga, because it reveals that the brand had surpassed the business in importance. The appearance of momentum had become a substitute for genuine momentum. And that substitution, once it begins, only accelerates in one direction. But the pattern of managing relationships until they become inconvenient, that did not originate in Hollywood. It began considerably earlier, and it began with people Meghan called her closest friends. David Beckham and Prince Harry first connected in 2012. By 2018, the friendship had matured to the point that the Beckhams received invitations to the royal wedding at Windsor Castle. Victoria Beckham had personally assisted with the interior design of Frogmore Cottage. This was not a celebrity acquaintance. This was a real, multi-year personal bond between two of the most identifiable families on the planet. And the Beckhams were firmly in Meghan's corner. Here is what Tom Bauer documented in his investigation titled, House of Beckham. At the 2018 Invictus Games, the same year as the wedding, the same period when Victoria was helping furnish their home, Meghan issued a directive. Photographs of Harry standing alongside David Beckham were prohibited. No images of the two men together were to be captured or circulated. David Beckham was, by multiple accounts, genuinely bewildered. He did not discover until considerably later that the exclusion order originated directly from Meghan herself. And Bauer's reporting includes the rationale. She did not want any competition in the media from Beckham, and especially not from his wife Victoria. Sit with that for a moment. She welcomed them to the wedding. She accepted Victoria's assistance, decorating her home. But the moment David Beckham's face beside Harry's might redirect even a single camera angle away from Meghan at a public event, that was intolerable. That was the boundary. And then came the accusation that shattered the entire friendship. Meghan reportedly contacted David Beckham in what sources characterize as a tense phone call and accused Victoria of feeding stories about her to the British press. David Beckham was, according to multiple reports, absolutely incensed. And royal correspondent Kinsey Schofield confirmed what actually happened. It was a salon receptionist with, as she put it, a pair of loose lips. Not Victoria, never Victoria. The accusation was wrong, demonstrably, provably wrong. But by the time the truth surfaced, the friendship was already demolished. And where does David Beckham stand today? He has stated publicly that whenever the Prince of Wales sends him a message requesting something, the answer is invariably yes. That is not neutrality. That is a man who experienced something, assessed what it signified, and selected a side. And I think we both recognize which side is the one where accusations proved false. The Beckham story is not a footnote, it is the blueprint. Welcome someone in, accept their generosity, leverage their social capital, and the instant their presence threatens to compete with yours for even a sliver of public attention, eliminate them. If they resist elimination, accuse them of disloyalty. And if the accusation turns out to be baseless, never correct it, because by then the relationship is already severed and the narrative has moved on. Watch for that blueprint. You are going to see it recur. But a false accusation against a friend that causes social damage, that is personally damaging. What is structurally damaging, what carries institutional and legal weight, is a formal document filed by someone on the inside. And that document was filed 4 years earlier than most people realize. October 2018. Jason Knopf. That name should matter to you. He was Meghan's own communications secretary. Not a journalist, not a critic, not someone harboring a pre-existing agenda. This was the man Prince Harry personally requested to help Meghan compose the now famous private letter to her estranged father, Thomas Markle, a trusted insider by every available measure, the individual closest to the machinery of how Meghan's public image was constructed and sustained. 2 months after assisting with that letter, Knopf dispatched a formal email to Simon Case, who at that time served as private secretary to Prince William. He copied the Buckingham Palace Human Resources Department. And here is what that email contained. On the record, in Knopf's own words, he wrote that he was very concerned that the Duchess had been able to bully 2 personal assistants out of the household in the past year. He wrote that the Duchess appeared intent on always having someone in her sights. He described her as bullying a specific staff member and actively seeking to erode that individual's confidence. He cited multiple accounts from people who had witnessed unacceptable behavior. And then Knopf wrote the line that should stop you cold. He questioned whether the household policy on bullying and harassment applies to principals. Read that once more. He was not merely reporting specific incidents. He was asking, in writing, to the Human Resources Department whether the rules governing workplace conduct in the royal household even apply to the person he worked for. That is not a complaint from someone nursing a personal grievance. That is not a disgruntled employee venting frustrations after a difficult week. That is a question from someone who already knows the answer and is documenting it regardless because the situation has become untenable. Now, here is the institutional response. And this is where I need you to observe the framing with extreme care. Meghan's official reaction, delivered through a spokesperson in March of 2021, 3 full years after the complaint was submitted, was this: "The Duchess is saddened by this latest attack on her character, particularly as someone who has been the target of bullying herself." Do you see what occurred there? a formal human resources complaint submitted by her own communications secretary, a man the royal family trusted sufficiently to involve in the most sensitive personal correspondence, was reframed in a single sentence as an attack on a bullying victim. The accuser became the accused. The documented complaint became the latest attack. And the person asking whether the rules apply was never publicly answered, because here is what we know happened next. Harry reportedly asked Knopf not to pursue the complaint. Knopf resigned approximately 1 month later, and he went directly to work for Prince William. The most trusted insider became the most informed adverse witness. He carried his knowledge, his documentation, and his professional reputation to the other side of the palace wall. And the findings of Buckingham Palace's internal investigation into those allegations, still sealed, never disclosed. The public, in all likelihood, will never learn what that investigation concluded, but the trajectory of the man who filed it reveals everything about how seriously the institution regarded what he reported. Here is the part where the contracts begin speaking, because corporate capital does not function on emotion. Corporate capital functions on performance metrics, deliverables, and return on investment. And when multiple corporations independently arrive at the same conclusion about the same client within the same time frame, that is not misfortune. That is data. 2020. Harry and Meghan sign a deal with Spotify. Reported value, $20 million, 3-year contract, the declared mission, a podcast series sharing stories through diverse voices and perspectives. What was actually produced over the life of that contract? 13 episodes of a single series called Archetypes, 1 standalone holiday special, then silence. June 16, 2023, the deal officially terminates. And on that very same day, a man named Bill Simmons appears on his own podcast and says something that becomes the most quoted assessment of the Sussex brand in the entertainment industry. Simmons was the head of podcast innovation and monetization at Spotify. This is a man who built and sold The Ringer to Spotify for $196 million. He comprehends content economics the way a surgeon comprehends anatomy. He is not a gossip columnist. He is not a royal commentator. He is a man who evaluates content businesses for a living. And his verdict was one word: grifters. He called them the grifters on the record, at full volume, on a podcast that the entire industry monitors. And then he said something even more revealing. He said he needs to get drunk one night and tell the story of a Zoom call he had with Harry. A specific call, a specific pitch from Harry about a podcast idea. A story Simmons considers one of the best stories he possesses, and he has yet to share it publicly. He said he needs alcohol before he can bring himself to recount it. That is not someone who is casually annoyed by a business partnership that underdelivered. That is someone who witnessed something specific, something that exposed how the Sussexes genuinely approach these deals, and who is choosing very deliberately when and how to deploy that information. That story exists somewhere, and it is sitting like an unexploded device in the center of this entire narrative. Meanwhile, the Netflix trajectory follows a pattern so similar to Spotify that if you placed the two timelines side by side, you would assume someone copied the homework. The reported deal, $100 million. The initial documentary series that topped the platform's charts, but topped them because, and only because, it contained direct assaults on the British royal family. That was the content that generated viewership. Not the storytelling, not the production values, the controversy. The follow-up projects generated what one industry analysis characterized as no major splash. Netflix invested as an equity partner in Meghan's lifestyle brand. Netflix then withdrew from that brand entirely. The original production deal was quietly downgraded from an overall deal to a first-look arrangement in the summer of 2025. The deal expired without renewal in July of 2025. 2 seasons of a lifestyle show called With Love, Meghan aired. No third season has been announced. The pattern is identical. Sign large, promise more, deliver less, attribute the shortfall to external forces, depart quietly, advance to the next contract. The financial arithmetic is the same every single time, and I believe the individuals writing the checks finally began comparing notes. Because here is what transpires when 3 separate corporations in the same industry all reach the same conclusion independently. It ceases to be about one bad deal. It becomes about due diligence. Every future partner, every potential investor, every brand contemplating an association performs the same calculation. They examine Spotify's outcome. They examine Netflix's outcome. They examine the William Morris Endeavor departure, and they pose a very simple question. What do those three organizations know that I do not? And the answer is increasingly available in the public record for anyone willing to examine it. The track record is the warning label, and the warning label is growing longer. Now, I need you to step back from the contracts and the corporate collapses for a moment, because beneath every executive who quietly distanced themselves from this story, beneath every deal that expired without renewal, there is a human story. And it belongs to a woman who has never spoken about it publicly, who, according to people who know her, still cannot bring herself to. Her name is Jessica Mulroney. She was Meghan's best friend, not a celebrity acquaintance, not a strategic networking connection, a genuine years-long friendship forged in Toronto long before anyone outside of a Suits fan forum could identify Meghan Markle's name. Jessica introduced Meghan to influential social circles in Canada. She curated Meghan's wardrobe. She was the person Meghan trusted with the private late-night details of her life that never surfaced in any interview. The conversations that unfold after 11 at night, the ones that never get scripted, the ones where you articulate the things you would never say on camera. And at Meghan's wedding in May of 2018, the most watched royal wedding of a generation, Jessica Mulroney's children served as the page boys and the bridesmaid. I need you to comprehend the gravity of that decision. You do not place someone's children in your wedding party as a networking gesture. You do not entrust a woman's kids with the rings and the flowers unless she is the person you trust most in the world. That is the most intimate personal role you can extend to another human being on the most significant day of your life. 2 years later, June of 2020, Jessica Mulroney became entangled in a social media controversy. She was accused of exhibiting white privilege during a public dispute with a lifestyle influencer. Her television appearances were canceled almost immediately. Her public career disintegrated within days. She was navigating one of the most painful, most exposed chapters of her adult life, and Meghan severed ties completely, immediately, publicly. Now, you might be inclined to extend benefit of the doubt here. Perhaps the friendship had already been fading. Perhaps the distance was mutual. Perhaps this is simply two busy people in different countries drifting apart as people occasionally do. But examine the calendar. June 2020. The Black Lives Matter movement was at its global zenith. Meghan was actively constructing her identity as a racial justice advocate in America. Her entire brand pivot, the repositioning that would define her post-royal American persona, was unfolding in real time, and her closest personal friend had just become the epicenter of a racial controversy. Jessica Mulroney was not merely emotionally inconvenient to retain, she was strategically necessary to sever. And what happened to Jessica afterward is, to me, the most quietly devastating detail in this entire saga. A confidant described her experience. She was subjected to extraordinary pain in 2020 and has endured an emotional ordeal since then, observing everything unfold in the media with inaccurate reports about her, entirely unable to respond. Unable to respond because Jessica Mulroney, the woman who holds years of private conversations, personal confidences shared behind closed doors, knowledge that was never intended to become public, has maintained complete silence. And sources close to the situation say Meghan is very conscious of that silence, and very conscious of what might transpire if it breaks. One insider disclosed to media outlets that publishers have been offering seven-figure sums for Jessica's memoir, The Woman Who Held the Flowers, who offered her children to stand beside Meghan at the altar. Discarded at the precise moment her existence became a brand liability. That is not a friendship that concluded. That is a relationship that was liquidated. Now, let me demonstrate what all of this actually costs in commercial terms, because we are well beyond the territory of embarrassment or unfavorable press cycles. We are in structural, measurable, documented collapse. Start with the trademark. In September of 2024, the United States Patent and Trademark Office rejected Meghan's application to register American Riviera Orchard as a protected trademark. The reason cited was that the name references a geographical location, specifically the area surrounding her hometown of Montecito, California. And United States trademark law prohibits the registration of geographic descriptors as brand names. Read that again. She was constructing an entire lifestyle empire. Jams, teas, honey, wine, crate mix, flour sprinkles, all of it anchored to a brand name that was legally unprotectable from the outset. Someone either failed to conduct a fundamental trademark search before committing to the name, or someone did conduct the search, received the result, and proceeded regardless. Either explanation is disqualifying for a business operation at this scale. The February 2025 rebrand to As Ever was not a creative evolution. It was a legal emergency disguised as a brand refresh. The foundation had been invalid from the start. Now, track the staff departures because the figures alone narrate a story that no press release can counteract. 18 senior departures since 2018. That is not a human resources challenge. That is not the ordinary churn of a startup finding its footing. That is a pattern that professionals in adjacent industries recognize immediately and discuss behind closed doors. Chief of Staff Josh Kettler resigned after 3 months in 2024. 3 months. His stated reason was that there were aspects of the position he was not comfortable with. The industry standard tenure for a chief of staff role is 3 to 5 years. 3 months is not a career move. 3 months is an escape. Chief Communications Officer Meredith Maines resigned on December 26th. 2025. Executive Director of the Archewell Foundation, James Holt, resigned on December 29th, 2025. 3 days apart, end of year. The two most senior individuals in the Sussex communications and organizational structure departing within 72 hours of each other. Royal commentator Helena Chard stated it directly. She described Maines as a highly respected communications professional who would, without question, be safeguarding her own reputation from what Chard characterized as the Sussexes' potentially damaging and erratic behavior. And then Chard made the observation that, for me, penetrates to the core of every professional departure in this file. She said a communication strategy only functions if all parties adhere to the plan. She was not saying the strategy was flawed. She was saying the principal was not following it, that the people engaged to manage the brand were being overruled by the person whose brand they were hired to manage, that the communications team was losing internal battles they should have been winning because someone above them was issuing unilateral decisions that contradicted the agreed-upon approach. And here is the cultural artifact that emerged from within the institution years before the commercial world caught up. Former palace staff coined the term Sussex Survivors Club. Half-jokingly, they said. Half. That phrase was not invented by tabloid headline writers. It was invented by the people who worked most closely with them, and it continues acquiring new members. So where does that leave us? Let me resolve every thread I have opened. The Shield. Harry Emanuel and William Morris Endeavor furnished Meghan Markle with a press suppression apparatus that functioned as effectively as any corporate communications operation in Hollywood. When the relationship reportedly collapsed in January of 2024, the protective barrier vanished and every negative story that had been contained released simultaneously. The Variety report on Netflix tensions, the staff departures, the brand failures, all of it published in the unshielded window. The shield was not supplementary, it was structural, and when it fell, the flood was immediate. The document. Jason Knopf's formal complaint in October of 2018 remains the most institutionally significant piece of evidence in this story. A trusted insider, hand-selected by Harry himself, formally questioned whether workplace bullying and harassment policies applied to Meghan. The investigation's findings were never released. Knopf departed and went directly to work for William. The complaint was recast by Meghan's team as an attack on a bullying victim. The institutional record was sealed, and the question Knopf posed, whether the rules apply to principals, has still never been publicly answered. The Friends. David and Victoria Beckham, barred from photographs, accused of press leaks that were traced to a salon receptionist, and ultimately forfeited as allies. Jessica Mulroney, granted the most intimate role at the wedding, severed immediately when her existence became a brand liability, and sustained in silence by the implicit understanding that she possesses private knowledge the Sussexes cannot afford to see published. The Clooneys, Oprah Winfrey, Elton John, Gina Torres, Meghan's former castmate on Suits, stated publicly and without malice, "We do not have her number. We just do not. Not as a complaint, just as a fact." Elton John, one of the most loyal figures in British celebrity, a man who remained close to Harry out of genuine devotion to Princess Diana, reportedly now endeavors to have as little contact with Meghan as possible. One anonymous source, someone with a front-row seat to the entire 8-year arc of this story, distilled it into a single sentence. The The people who have remained most loyal to them are beneath them and derive something from it. Everyone else, they fall out with. The contracts. Spotify signed a $20 million deal and received 13 episodes and a holiday special before the head of podcast monetization labeled them grifters on the record. Netflix signed a reported $100 million deal, witnessed its equity investment in the lifestyle brand collapse, downgraded the production arrangement, and permitted the deal to expire without renewal. The United States Patent and Trademark Office rejected the brand name upon which the entire lifestyle empire was constructed. 18 senior staff members departed since 2018, including a chief of staff who endured 3 months and 2 executives who resigned 3 days apart at the close of 2025. The spectators. At the 2025 Invictus Games, a wheelchair basketball match attracted 43 paying attendees. 100 additional individuals were reportedly transported in and arranged around Harry and Meghan for photographs. The man who departed a centuries-old institution with actual infrastructure, staffed embassies, genuine global diplomatic reach, and a billion-dollar brand constructed across generations. That man's flagship independent event required stage management to fabricate the appearance of public interest. The brand is not merely failing. The brand is being maintained on life support and photographed to appear healthy. And then there is Harry, the man who authored a memoir attacking his own brother's appearance and his family's private grief. The man who now attends polo matches alone, book launches alone, charity events where 43 people paid to occupy the room, and 100 more were brought in to populate the photograph. In March of 2025, Harry resigned from Sentabale, his African charity supporting children affected by HIV, a charity he co-founded. Alongside him, the co-founder, the chief executive, and the entire board of trustees also departed. Harry had not visited the charity for 4 years. He returned in October of 2024, reportedly attempted to remove the chair, failed, and then resigned. 4 years of absence, 1 visit, an immediate attempt at control, immediate failure, exit. That sequence reveals everything about the operating model. And Frogmore Cottage, that was not merely a residence. It was the final physical tether to the institution that endowed them with their entire commercial value. Every Netflix deal, every Spotify contract, every brand partnership was priced against the worth of their royal association. The titles, the access, the reflected authority of the British crown. King Charles removed that property, and with it, the last tangible justification for the entire post-royal enterprise. They exited the monarchy to become something independent. They spent 6 years attempting, and the most candid public assessment of what they actually became was delivered by a man on a podcast on a Friday afternoon in June of 2023, Bill Simmons, a man who had signed a $20 million deal with them, who had sat across from them on Zoom calls, who had observed the operation from the inside. He said grifters on the record at full volume, and then he said he has a specific story from a specific Zoom call involving a specific pitch from Harry that he considers one of the best stories he possesses, and he has yet to tell it. That story exists. It is sitting somewhere, waiting. And I believe that call, whatever Harry said on it, whatever he pitched, whatever it exposed about how they genuinely believe this operates, is the single piece of evidence that binds this entire pattern into one clean line. Every departure, every accusation, every contract that expired without announcement, every friend who was severed, every staff member who walked out, every brand that was staged for photographs. It all connects back to one operating principle that the people nearest to the machine keep articulating in different words, but with identical meaning. So I will leave you with the question I cannot answer. The one that Bill Simmons is preserving in his back pocket for the evening. He finally decides to uncork that bottle. What did Harry say on that Zoom call? And when that story ultimately surfaces, will it astonish anyone who has been paying attention? Or will it merely confirm what 43 empty seats in Vancouver already communicated? Because here is what I keep returning to. Every person and every corporation in this story traced the same trajectory. Enthusiasm at the beginning, proximity in the middle, and a quiet, carefully managed departure at the conclusion. The Beckhams, Spotify, Netflix, William Morris Endeavor, Jessica Mulroney, Jason Knopf, 18 senior staff members. The pattern is so consistent, so mechanically repetitive, that at a certain point you cease asking what went wrong with each individual relationship and begin asking what is the common denominator that links all of them. And the answer is sitting right there in the record, documented by the people who were closest, confirmed by the corporations that wrote the largest checks, and summarized most efficiently by a man who simply uttered one word and then retained the best portion of the story for later.